Yeah,
Okay.
it's actually specifically a release dove, like the kinds of doves that they keep in cages for ceremonies. And I actually wrote in my reflection, like, this type of dove has multiple different meanings, but they're all sort of celebratory in a sense, because like they're let go at weddings, but funerals, and there's also stuff like the Olympics, and like, doves are often depicted holding olive branches in their beaks, and olive branches are actually depicted on the flag of like the United Nations. And so it's very like traditionally peace.
Yeah. Is there a personal connection?
Not not directly personal, but growing up as a kid, I used to stare at maps all the time. I had a big world map on my wall, and I was such a nerd that when I got home from school every day, I would get my dry erase pen. It was like a whiteboard map, and I would draw on the map. I would outline different countries I was interested in, or like, look at something. And this was during like the middle of the 2010s, let's say, and I was thinking like, this world map hasn't changed in a while, and my naive, kid brain, without really grasping like the horrors of like the real world, kind of was like, let's see some war. I want to see, things not just stay the same forever. And now we are in 2025, and there's stuff like Russia, Ukraine has been going on for 3 years. Israel, Palestine has been going on for well over a year. And there was always the Syrian civil war and the fall of Assad previously, and that has been going on since like, 2014? And it's just, I want to take back what I said back then, but I was a naive kid and I didn't know like the huge, like, groups of people that just get wiped off the face of the earth like this. And so as a kid, I wanted to see some, some news, but as an adult, I yearned for, the doves.
Kind of answered why to choose. As you see it finished right now, is there anything that you would go back and add or change?
The dove had the most trouble with that, especially the tail feather, trying to get the markings on there, because like I'm going for this very like simplified, almost cartoony style. It's very circular and round, but the thing with that is that a dove is a very white, like, very one color sort of animal. And so I would try to add like color wherever possible, but I also wanted to keep it realistic. That was my paradox. I would go back and make the tail feathers a little bit more like structured. It's like most bird feathers are like kind of like overlapping in on each other. I only really had like, the experience in modeling to like make like this little leaf like shape that you can see right there. And the wings could also be like perched up instead of like clasped toward the sides. I think everything else turned out pretty nicely. I wish that I could have done the gun again with the experience that I have now, because there are some imperfections, but I would hope they aren't too obvious.
I think it looks very nice.
Thank you.
Especially when you first started and you were going back and forth to the scene. I was like, oh my god, that looks so good. I think you did it. Was there, thinking about this idea of peace and war, was there a reason, maybe you answered this, to do the gun and the dove instead of like something else to represent those things?
So as I mentioned earlier, the dove is a symbol for peace, but as for the gun, it's a lot different, because there is no like one symbol for war, and there is no one symbol for peace, but like illustrated peace, like on posters or like protests, it's always a dove, whereas war is something that is not only like not universal, dependent on like a country. It could be the symbols of a country, like Russia has their flag, or the letter Z has been used a lot. Israel has the Star of David. Palestine has like watermelons. And so I tend to see war in a more general sense through the weapons that are used to fight it. And this isn't necessarily like a war rifle, it's definitely like a personal use pistol, but it's blocky and it has a modular shape that can be put together very easy from originally blocky soap bars. And then I have 6 bullets here. This gun isn't a revolver, but there is this sort of stigma around like Russian roulette and revolvers with how you can like spin the kind of bullet holding.
Yeah.
And there's definitely like some kind of very, very subtle undercurrent of like luck kind of stroking throughout this piece.
How would you say this piece represents you as an artist?
So I tend to get a reputation for being a blocky, simplified artist. I definitely think the gun is blocky, and it definitely speaks to my own interests in geopolitics. You can definitely tell that, like, as a kid, I've grown up looking at maps for probably longer than I've slept, if I'm being quite frank. The bird is also, I love, like, depicting animals in more cartoony, cute sort of fashions, even when paired up against shocking imagery. I do kind of love the tension that's held against the realistic gun with the cute bird that's not very like realistically portrayed. If you take the gun off right here, there's a big blood splatter, and that is a texture that I really enjoy. Not like blood, but like the splattery shape. I like kind of like dripping slimes kind of work. Everyone back in the days of like Pinterest, they would like tape crayons to the top of a canvas and they would take a hair dryer to it, and I did that. Everyone that I knew did that, and so I'm just like, I love it. I want there to be a big right here. And I also grew up with a lot of porcelain and china in my house. My parents would leave it on their dresser, special commemorative plates, even like picture frames had some kind of element of that. And so I really wanted to go for like an ornate flower type.
If given the opportunity, what ways would you try to push this project a little bit further? Just in general, like if it was on your own time, or if you were given this project beginning class?
I actually had a really interesting thought with this. First of all, I used air dry clay for my material. When this project was assigned, the first images that she gave us were of ceramic, glazed ceramic, and I was like, I want to do that too.
Yeah.
If you couldn't tell, but like, I wanted to use actual clay and glaze it and put it in a kiln. But that wasn't available as an option. You can't just like go to a kiln, and obviously I don't want to buy a kiln for one project. So my alternative was using this Italian air dry clay that she recommended to me at Plaza, and glazing over it with Model Magic. If I can invite you to like kind of like drag your finger along it, it has a very ceramic-like texture. And so I would definitely also use a pottery wheel to model the plate, which I definitely could do now because there are like community pottery wheels. And the way that I made my plate in this instance was I bought small paper plates and I put a bunch of like a clay sheet on a paper plate, and I took another paper plate and I just crushed them together, and I kind of like cut off the excess and paper plate,
Yeah. Would you make it bigger?
That is a little bit of a complicated question, because in my sketches for this, the bird was originally going to be facing the gun directly and looking straight down. However, I realized that either the plate would need to be really big to accommodate the length of the bird, or the bird would need to be really small and the gun would be huge and it wouldn't look great. So I figured turning the bird to the side would be the best. If I needed to go with the bird sort of like perched with the tail hanging off the plate, then yes, I would make it bigger. I also think that not necessarily bigger per se, but more bullets could have driven the point home, but it could have also been a little excessive. There were a couple times where I wanted to put like a hole in the bird's head and have a bullet stick out of it, but I mean, it is a little too macabre for my taste, especially like, when trying to keep these things interacting, but also like separate on their own grounds. We don't want war to overpower everything.
what if the bird, in some type of way, was like flying and overriding that lure type of thought?
Oh, so like leaping above the plate, kind
Yeah,
of like
almost something like
suspended. That would be a
Right.
really interesting take. And that kind of goes back to the question you said, like, what would you do if you could do this again?
Yeah.
I would consider that angle now that you bring it up. And it would be a little more complicated sculpturally, but you
Yeah.
could also, I had a conversation with Miss Orr about the painting, and I was like, I looked up a release of on my phone, and I was like, the only real color in this, as I mentioned earlier, my struggles with color, were around the eyes and the beak and the feet, but we don't have to worry about the feet.
Right.
So, you know, adding like a pose of the bird where the feet are, you know, shown and observable would help not only make it sort of a little more animal-like because it has those talons, but also, you know, more splash of color.
Would you color the gun?
I was considering coloring the gun, but I wanted to make it obvious that it was soap.
Okay.
I mean, there in and of itself, it's obvious why I would want to do that, but also the fact that I feel like if it were colored, it would take away from the carving a bit because
Okay.
paint could definitely like override smaller, more
Yeah.
finely built details. Especially if you look here, there's a unique trigger that I carved out and a barrel that has an actual hole in it. I want to show that to the camera right here. Here's the trigger and the barrel.
That's cool. You have any questions for me?
I mean, in a way, I kind of wonder, like, if you were doing War and Peace and had the same idea with the bird and the gun, what would be your version of this?
Maybe thinking about your reasoning. Go the opposite way of doing the bird like a cartoon knife and doing the gun cartoon knife and the bird realistic so it overpowers.
Yeah.
Maybe just that.
Yeah, I did want an element of tension to be spread throughout the piece, like with this, like, oh, don't harm the cute little bird, and like the gun is like realistic, and you're kind of meant to have like a knee-jerk reaction to that because you're kind of lured into this false sense of security with the bird being cute and cuddly, and then the gun is like so, like, where did that come from?